Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the launch of How to Get Over Being Young, a rough guide to midlife by Charlotte Bauer. My name is Jennifer Malik. I'm the editor of The Reading List, and we're hosting this launch tonight along with Love Books, your favorite independent bookstore, and Penguin Random House, South Africa. Joining Charlotte for the discussion this evening is Michele Magwood, who needs no introduction, an award-winning book critic and former contributing books editor of the Sunday Times. Our celebrated author this evening, Charlotte, is a prize-winning journalist and Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. She was born in the UK, and she and her family moved to South Africa in the 1970s. She lives between Johannesburg and southwest France. How to Get Over Being Young is a deliciously funny and sage guide to midlife, an unscientific, flaws and all account of one woman's adventures and misadventures through the dark comedy of the wilderness years. Signed copies of the book are available for sale at Love Books in Melville, Johannesburg. So if you want a signed copy, which is something everyone should have for their bookshelf, contact Kate Rogan at kate@lovebooks.co.za. For readers outside South Africa, the book is also available on Amazon UK, Amazon.com, Waterstones, and all good bookshops. Please leave your questions about the book or about the discussion in the comment section wherever you're watching this video, on Facebook or on YouTube, as we'll have time to answer some of those questions during a Q&A towards the end of the session. So pop your questions in the comment section as the discussion goes along, and I'll be back towards the end of the talk to relay your questions to Charlotte. Without further ado, let me hand over to Michele to take over the conversation, and enjoy the launch.
Thanks so much, Jen, and welcome everyone. I've been looking forward to this evening for a long time to talk to Charlotte, basically because Charlotte and I do a lot of talking normally. There's usually wine involved, as there will be tonight. But I've also seen this book developing from its very first chapters. And so what is now 4 years ago. So I'm very pleased to hold it, Charlotte, in my hands at last. Here we go.
Me too.
How to Get Over Being Young, a rough guide to midlife. Please take note of the stiletto hanging off there. I mean, I don't know when I last wore a stiletto, but still. So here we go with the book. So Charlotte, it felt like a very different book when you started out. When you started out, it seemed as if you were wisecracking. And then by the end of this book, I've realized that a great deal of wisdom has settled onto it. But I want to describe it as having two threads. There seem to be two threads in the book. And one is about aging well, and the other is a portrait of a very long marriage. And the two are intertwined. So I would want to kick off because you actually kicked the book off with a visit to a marriage counselor's office. So let's start from there.
Well, the point about a long marriage, Michele, is it's long. And in a sense, the parallel versions of the book that you're presenting, Growing Older, which is also a long process if you're lucky enough to have it, and being in a long relationship from your youth into your middle age and possibly beyond, those two things can, I mean, it's the person you perhaps love most in the whole world, who is your best friend in many ways, who is the most annoying person in your life, etc., etc. And when you start, if you start to want very different things in your life fundamentally, you become again an individual. And that is a path of collision. And that's what happened in my relationship.
So what did the counselor counsel? He seemed to say, do you want this marriage or don't you?
Well, he was pretty brutal. And we'd heard he was a fast worker. And that was his opening question. Do you or don't you want this marriage? And that sort of concentrates the mind. And I think we decided we did, but that we were going to have to bend the relationship to fit the times and our own changing kind of needs and desires.
So part of how you've done it, which you write about a lot, is, and it is rather drastic, was you moved to France. You yourself moved to France, and your husband, he comes and goes still from there. And I wanted to know, and I wanted to say how. I'm sorry, I've just been put off by these questions coming up on the screen, Jen. So to me, there's a subgenre of writing, of nonfiction, and I call it menoporn. And it is when women of a certain age move to Europe, they move to Tuscany and they buy a vineyard, or they move to Greece and they buy an olive farm, or they move to France. And I think it sounds a lot more, and in your case, bought a farmhouse and started a guest house. But I think it sounds a lot more romantic, and it sounds a lot more romantic than it is. It was a lot of hard work.
Well, first of all, hands up to being a trope, to actually sort of living the cliche, the romantic. And I think where my story kind of separates from a lot of those other fabulous, under the sun stories is, I wasn't remotely interested in sort of going to the market with my basket and plucking out the ripest tomatoes and, living in the city. I'd barely, I really wasn't on first name terms with insects, for example, and the whole countryside, the romance of the countryside came as a bit of a shock to me, to be honest. And that's where I kind of, started to have second thoughts about my kind of place in the sun. But that was much later.
But you used that time to do a lot of hard work on yourself, on your interior, so to speak, didn't you?
I did. I mean, I don't think I intended to. I thought that moving, semigrating, if you like, to another country, being partly apart from my husband and sort of trying to work that out as we went along, I thought that would be the end game, actually, that this was what I'd wanted, and now I had it, and now I should just shut up and lie on my bed because I made it. And I think the introspection that really kind of was the catalyst for wanting to write this book was unexpected. It was uncomfortable. And I was very lonely.
Because he didn't necessarily want to move to France himself.
No. I mean, I was very lucky, very privileged. I'm very aware of that we had the opportunity to do that at all. And it was always going to be a sort of a come and go. I mean, somebody had to keep working, pay the rent, and it was him. So no, it wasn't clear then whether we were building a new nest for us or who. Yeah.
So there are some very amusing passages in this, and in fact, this is how the book started out, and how I was assuming it was going to continue, and that is moving to France and trying to move into that society and the kind of mistakes that you make. And there's one hilarious incident with trying to explain that your television is broken to a workman and that sort of thing.
I mean, that was another unexpected. Well, that wasn't so unexpected. The fact that my kind of schoolyard French wasn't quite up to being understood. So sort of voice message to electrician: salutations, Monsieur Fabre. My television doesn't walk. Could you please come to watch it very soon? I embrace you. So it's very infantilizing being in a new country, as anybody who has been, particularly in another language, would know. So I was very occupied with that in the beginning. I wasn't really thinking of my sort of inner life at that particular moment. No.
And I mean, I've visited you there, and it was immensely hard work. I could see. I mean, you renovated the old farmhouse for a start. and then we started taking in paying guests, and then it's. I mean, you were working yourself to the bone.
Yeah, but yes, but renovation, everybody's renovation stories are boring. But when you're the one sitting there with builder's dust in your teeth, it's hard work. But getting a guest house going was a lot of fun too, because I'd been a journalist for 30 years, and suddenly my job was to make people happy, which being a journalist doesn't always make other people happy. And that was actually fantastic. But yeah, steep learning curve.
But I think that was quite a blow to you, Charlotte, when you ended being that journalist and editor, and a very prominent journalist and editor. It was a complete break. And I think that was quite a blow to you to lose that. And this is what we're talking about as women moving through life, that when that identity has been taken away from you and you need to assume a new identity, I don't think that was easy.
No, it wasn't. I mean, again, hands up, it was my decision. It was my choice. And I think, like a lot of women of our age, Michelle, it is a time to, transitioning to an older female implies making a lot of changes emotionally, physically, spiritually, etc. And work was a big one for me. It was really one of the few areas of my life where I felt in control, in command, and confident. But I did decide to give it up. But I tried to keep it going for a couple of years as a freelance, as a consultant, as a lot of people at our stage of life do, either because you've lost interest in your full-time job and you want to sort of repurpose and recalibrate your skills. And that is what I managed to do for a couple of years. But hey, if you're not around, you're not around. So the work dried up. And that was hard.
There's something wonderful about the tone of the book, because it feels as if we're sitting on your balcony talking, as we're reading the book. And I think that intimacy, that balance, how did you get that? I mean, it's a very difficult balance to reach.
Wow. It started off very differently, as you know, Michelle. It took years of practice and rewrites to get there. And I think it started off as a way to entertain myself, in a sense. And I didn't have a lot of other work or intellectual stimulation going on at the time. And it wasn't so much, it certainly didn't start off as that I have so much to impart to other women, my wisdom, etc., etc. It was more, I've been a journalist for a long time. I love to observe human nature. Why don't I have a go at observing my own as a way to sort of go through this in a slightly less lonely way, I guess. And that sort of kicked it off. And then talking to all my wonderful, wonderful women friends and the crazy women in my family, just kind of, it sort of grew into something else. It was no longer just a romp. I started to have actual insights in a very anecdotal way into my experiences and the experiences of, everybody who just in such a heartfelt, humorous way shared theirs with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt as if you'd been tucking these stories away like treasures for those couple of years. But of course, it was while you were there, Charlotte, that you became a grandmother, which is a major life passage. I mean, how was that for you?
It was absolutely fantastic. I was overjoyed. I am overjoyed. It is a whole new identity. It's another little piece of your puzzle that you hadn't necessarily expected, and certainly hadn't kind of said, when are you going to give me grandchildren? I mean, it was just wonderful. But I didn't feel I was too young to be a granny, although when people said to me, you look too young to be a granny, I was 54 then, I loved it. And I was like, well, I'm certainly not going to be called granny. So I, after a long kind of exploration of kind of granny names. Boo Boo, Chi Chi, Gaga, Ya. I was like, oh my
Nana,
God.
yeah.
They sound like rescue chimps. That's not the kind of granny I'm going to be. So I settled on Coco, as in Chanel, sort of waist-length pearls and perfume, and not a granny who'd get down on her knees and play horsey, but somebody who would, dress her grandchildren in black. I was like, that's it. That's the granny I'm going to be. Unfortunately, that name got very quickly mangled in my grandson's baby tongue and turned into Toto, who is Dorothy's little dog in The Wizard of Oz. Anyway, the whole family said, well, that serves you right for being pretentious. So I am Toto.
But you also discovered that Toto has a certain meaning in France, doesn't it?
Well, thank you so much for bringing that up. It means somebody who's not quite all there. So,
Okay.
yeah.
A fairly, a kind of a
In
kind
French,
of a dotty woman.
Yeah.
So you became a grandmother. Now, they say that when women are getting older, that the three things that appeal to them are the three G's, and that's God, gardening, and genealogy. What would you say to that?
I would say that safely that none of those three things particularly appeal to me. I've certainly never stuck my hands in potting soil. I think that's really interesting, and I think there's a stereotype of a woman who has gotten older, perhaps given up a job, and is now sort of making a very beautiful rose garden. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I don't think that'll ever happen to me.
No. But I
But
think
genealogy is interesting because, certainly as I get older, and I don't know about anyone else, I am more interested in where do I come from? Where does my family come from? Where do these traits come from? Blue eyes across sort of generations, or a bad temper, and I wasn't interested in asking my parents much about that when I was younger, because I think, when you're young, you're busy being, you're busy doing. Who cares where your great uncle Whatsit came from? So I do think that becomes more interesting as one gets older.
And when we, it does. I mean, your family roots, and we're going to return and talk about your family shortly. But I wanted to ask you, because the word we're talking about is menopause, and I wonder why that word sort of has a pejorative tone to it, and like menstruation. I'm absolutely delighted. There's a new book on the shelf called Flow, which is about menstruation, which I think is absolutely wonderful. I mean, it's time we took these words out into the light and, kind of shone the light on them. But there seems to be a slightly, as I say, sort of pejorative thing about the menopause.
Well, it's an ugly word, and I don't know if that's because we've made it so. It's kind of so medical. It's just such a medical word, and I don't think it really begins to... menopause is pejorative in the sense that we use it in, and it's kind of hot flush, hashtag, where have I left my glasses? Oops, they're on my head. So it's it's sort of partly medical and kind of gory, and nobody really wants to go down there. And it's partly kind of, it's a bit comic, and it's neither so gory nor so funny in reality, because it is just so much more complex and interesting and awful in some ways.
And awful, yeah. So you are fortunate in your, and I really hesitate to use the word journey because I can't stand the word, being on a journey. But you are very fortunate because you've got these two fantastic role models. There's your mother and your aunt, who you refer to as auntie. And they are now in their 80s, and they are a force, both individually and together, your mother and auntie. I mean, your mother with her flaming red hair, and auntie with her thongs. Tell us more about them.
Well, they are a bit of a force, and they're two women who've experienced many lives and much hardship along the way. And now they're in their 80s, they live next door to each other, and they role models. You know, when a lot of women are asked who are your role models, you know, a lot of women sort of say, well, my mom or Helen Mirren. I was like, well, you know, Helen Mirren doesn't, you know, very few of us look like that, have what she has, you know, but I'll stick with mom. And one of the things I love about them, apart from the fact that they can take life's lemons and spin absolute gold with them, and they've got guts and heart and tempers, that they insist on their voice, but they do it in the most engaging way. They are interested people. They're interested in other people's lives and stories. They do not sit around discussing their aches and pains. And they're still very naughty. They do crazy naughty things. You know, like my aunt recently tried to paint out the rust on her little white sports car with white nail polish. I mean, it looked like a bad French manicure, but nobody, you know, I mean, she sort of worked so hard at it, and the fact she could even get down there on her little old knees. I mean, you know, when I was quizzing her, because I did interview them over the years, and they were only too happy to talk about sex after 60 and death and their cosmetic surgeries, which was a double-edged gift.
No, don't tell me about the
me.
sex. No.
I know, it was a double-edged gift, but they just... When I said to my aunt, what about, how do you see the next 10 years if you have them going down? And she said, well, darling, I'm definitely not going into a retirement home. Pause. And then she said, I'd rather go to an orphanage. And I was like, what do you mean you'd rather, you can't? And she said, well, I like children. And you sort of, they say crazy stuff like that. But at the same time, you kind of get what they mean.
But they sound irrepressible, and I think that's what I mean about them being, you know, phenomenal role models, is that they're just unstoppable. I mean, I just have a vision of them playing canasta on a Saturday night, tossing back their cocktails and bickering. But the fact is, as you say, that, you know, nothing gets them down. I mean, your mum was a war child, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was. No, I mean, sometimes, I mean, they've both stopped smoking in their 80s. And they used to look like, remind me of Marge Simpson's sisters. You know, they'd sort of lie in bed, sort of with cups of tea, smoking, you know, sort of health and safety hazard on a mattress. And it's like, well, is this what you meant when you said you wanted to be cremated? I mean, what do you do? So, So they do silly things, and they say wonderfully silly things. And I really do think that is part of their charm, is that they don't, well, I shouldn't say they don't act their age, because it's one of the things that makes us believe that we are only the sum of our age. But
Right.
they don't act their age.
No. So you're one of four sisters, and then you have a young stepsister as well. You're the eldest. You know, you're the keeper of the fabulous Bauer girls. Three of you are writers. Of course, your sister Belinda is a best-selling crime novelist, and in my humble opinion, one of the best in the world for psychological suspense. But I kind of try and imagine the four of you together, and you say that it's an excitable family, and that things go pear-shaped very quickly when you finally do get together.
Well, I think things not always pear-shaped. As we get older, we have calmed down a bit. But things can start off, you know, sort of bubbling over with energy and excitement at being together again, because as the book describes, I've spent so many years away from my family. And that's not always been by anybody's choice. And then it kind of, after 2 days, we sort of played ourselves out and everybody gets sent to their room to sort of, examine their conscience and sort of calm down. And then you start ganging up against each other and sort of going off for little tete-a-tetes. And then, your mother says she's going to give you a good smack. And I mean, you're actually 45 years old. And then, it's sort of, well, that's it. We've all reverted to our default sibling, identities. And I know a lot of people out there who have siblings will recognize the feeling. And somehow it's like, well, it all feels right with the world. And you talk about Belinda. I mean, she is an extraordinary writer. She supports me. I support her. Our other sister, Katie Bauer, has written the two most beautiful books. And thank God, there's no competition there. We just absolutely thrilled for one another when something good happens.
So what do you think it was about, in your upbringing that turned you into writers, 3 of you at least?
I guess having such great material at our disposal, at our fingertips. It was not the most stable childhood in some ways, but it certainly was never boring. And our parents were 2 good people, loving people who kind of swerved off course for a period. And that was hard times. But possibly it was, my mother is a fabulous writer. And in the olden days, when we used to communicate by those little thin blue paper aerograms, airmail letters. I mean, her letters were just fabulous and descriptive of, where she'd been that day and who she'd seen, and gossip. And she would draw little annotations in the margins of her and Auntie Sue sort of sitting round, a fire, sort of playing cards to illustrate. I mean, she's a fabulous writer, and I guess we're lucky, and that's where it comes from.
Because you say that as sisters, you just kind of learned how to spin stories into gold. I want to ask you to do a short reading, a description of your sister, sister number 4, because you don't name your sisters, and this is going to bring us nicely onto the subject of treatments for aging and the lengths that we go to treat that. If you'll, give us a taste of the writing.
I certainly will. I do have a bit of a cold and my throat is very dry, Michelle, so I'll give it a whirl. And I know that saying you've got a cold these days sets alarm bells ringing, but that is why Lovely Love Books sensibly decided not to do this launch in store. So I hope it's just a cold. Of all my sisters, Sister 4 and I probably had the most in common when it came to pulling out all the try me, buy me beauty stops. We puzzled over mixed messages in women's magazines. Love yourself the way you are, lose 7 pounds by Saturday, and kept abreast of new technologies. We fought the enemy on the beaches and in the salons. We were the beauty equivalent of the Bletchley Park decoders, racing against the clock, honing our methods, performing experiments with hyaluronic acid, Dead Sea serums, fat burners, pore shrinkers, collagen infusions, mood-altering oils. Sister 4 had teamed up with her doctor and threw Botox parties with mojitos and group discounts. She made microblading sound like a daring new sport. She showed me how to use an epilator that pulled out leg hairs by the root and felt like being run over by a lawnmower. She gave me second-degree burns with a chemical peel she'd found on the dark web. TV makeover shows that warned viewers not to try this at home only spurred Sister 4 on. Her apartment was a red zone of electric wires, laser guns and hot wax. She bought an infrared sleeping bag, which she planned to take on a camping trip before remembering it had to be plugged in. Sister 4 believed in covering all the bases. When she wasn't weeping under a collagen lamp, she was mixing up home remedies, turmeric face masks that made her look like a Dorito for a week, and whitening toothpaste with bicarbonate of soda that caused her to foam at the mouth. The toothpaste turned out to be excellent for stubborn carpet stains. Those of us who weren't embracing our wrinkles were embracing the propaganda that decay could be stopped in its tracks with a personal trainer and a jar of exorbitantly expensive moisturizer. What the cosmetics houses and the media laughably called premature aging could be shown the door. There were secrets and spells that could be cast to keep the wicked queen away from our mirrors. Not all of us bought into this hype, but Sister and Four and I were leaving nothing to chance.
That's wonderful. Being the good journalist that you are, Charlotte, you did exhaustive research into treatments and applications and that kind of thing. And at one stage you're trying every supplement you can find. As you say, your pill hill was growing, but you said there was a pill for everything except fun.
Well, I found that one, didn't I, by mistake at the bottom of my makeup bag. But sorry, that wasn't really your question. But I do remember saying once.
Tell us about that. You have to tell us about that lone pill.
Well,
at the bottom of your makeup bag, covered in lipstick.
Covered in gunk that lives at the bottom of every woman's makeup bag. And as I say, there was a kind of drugs used to be fun. And now they come in blister packs. And it's the hormones, and it's the anti-anxiety meds, and it's the sleeping pills. And, you know, your makeup bag used to be bigger than your meds bag, right? But no longer.
No
and then one day I found this little ecstasy tablet, God knows how long it had been there, at the bottom of my makeup bag. And I knew it wasn't my anti-anxiety meds because it had little skull and crossbones on it. So I sort of, you know, excavated it from my makeup bag and popped it into an envelope, which I sealed and put into my bedside drawer. And I thought, well, it's a kind of talisman for me. I might not ever use it, but I never want to say never. Yeah. And this is my insurance against never saying never. And then I thought, well, what if I get dementia and I don't know what that envelope is or what's in it? So I very cleverly wrote on the envelope A, B, C, D, E. And I underlined the E twice. It was like, look, even if you get dementia, it'll give you a clue. And who knows, maybe you'll pop it on your 100th birthday. Yeah. So I still have that.
And Charlotte, talk to us about Botox. I mean, you know, your first experience wasn't great with Dr. B.
No, it wasn't. But it got better. No, I did. I walked out looking like his secret sister, the one the family keeps locked in the basement. That wasn't great, but it wasn't enough to put me off. And I think, I do argue that it's not necessarily vanity. When these small surface wounds become noticeable in your 40s or your 50s, it's not necessarily vanity that makes you sort of race off to get Botox. It's panic, and it's a shock. You know, when you start to look better from the back than the front. I mean, that's a shocker, if anyone's ever seen me from the back. And it was just a kind of, I need to do something. And now I have the most wonderful Botox doctor and so many other things. But I also kind of am starting to think, well, the fear has to stop somewhere. And, you know, my neck's starting to look as if it belongs to a different body. And when will we kind of accept the losses and look to the gains. But for now, I'm still going.
Sure.
Or at least
And
up here.
the book has got some, as I say, some very funny passages, but there's a lot here that we can think about afterwards. If we want to call it a takeaway, we can call it a takeaway, and talk more about that, about accepting losses, accepting your life changing.
Well, as much as I know and admire women who sort of seem to sail through it, for me, and I think a lot of us, Michele, this transition period, this sort of like second adolescence without such a happy outcome, is requires a kind of as one of my friends said, a ceremonial pause, kind of a gap year, to recalibrate, reboot, and just, it doesn't happen overnight. And it's okay, to feel the shock of it, the shock of the new. For me, it was important to say goodbye to my younger self, and I gave her a noisy, blubbery, big old send-off. It wasn't easy, but once she was in the ground, it's like it's going to
arrived. I'm still in one piece. I've just been put back together in new and interesting ways, and I have things to do. So many, many more things that I want to do.
Yeah.
What?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me exactly what, and I was like, I was trying to make a list. I can't say exactly all the things. I'd love to carry on writing. I think one of the things you and I have discussed, Michele, is having, if you're lucky enough, to have a little more time. So after you've gone through the kind of horror of self-examination and reflection, as I did, and tried to come out as sort of a better, if not a thinner person, it's sort of, I don't know. I've lost my thread. Why did I come into this room? Just remind me.
You do have, you also have a lovely list of epiphanies.
That's right. Things I learned.
Things that you learned on the way. And they are lovely. There's one that says compassion and kindness are sacred, but they take practice. So I knew you at the Sunday Times years ago, and you were quite a brittle journalist. You were quick. You could toss off 800 words before your first cup of morning coffee. And there was always mischief going on around your desk. There was always peals of laughter, that sort of thing. But the Charlotte that's emerged now at the end of this process is quite a different person. Like you've drilled down into it now, and we haven't even begun to talk about your writing process, because I think it was your editor and your agent who kept giving it back to you and saying, we want this, we want more, we want it deeper, deeper, deeper. And I've witnessed you working for so long and the result is astonishing.
Thank you. I definitely, if I think back to my earlier incarnation as a journalist, honestly, I can cringe at some of the things I might have said about other people for a cheap laugh. And among my epiphanies, and I learned through writing this book, was, laughter is essential, preferably at one's own expense. So yes, I think I've become a lot less brittle as a person, and that makes me happy. Yeah.
There's also after the lovely feel of the epiphanies is you have something which you call the fuck it list, which is because we don't need bucket lists now, we need fuck it lists. These are things that we're never going to have to do again, that we can now start saying no to.
Yeah. Don't answer the phone just because it rings. Don't finish a book just because you started it. You don't have to go on a cruise to the Bahamas. You don't have to kind of, hang out with people you have nothing in common with because you can't think up a good excuse in time, etc., etc., etc. So I think having a don't want to do list won't do, can't do list
Yeah.
is as healthy as having a can-do list.
I think in fact, mine is at the very top of that list, and that is I don't have to stay up till midnight on New Year's Eve anymore and pretend to be enjoying myself at a party. In fact, I don't need to go anywhere. We, as you say, we don't need to go anywhere that starts after 8 p.m. at night when we can be at home with a sausage roll and a pill in bed.
Exactly. I mean, I'm approaching getting ready for bedtime. You know, get on with it, Michelle. I'm nearly ready for bed now.
Yeah. Something you and I have discussed though, and that is ageism, and how whether things are changing for women generally, for older women specifically, and what we should be doing about it.
Well, it's a great question, and I don't know. I mean, I'd love to hear from other people whether there's a general sense or feeling in one's own life that things are getting better for older women. But I think, like all sort of stereotyping and discrimination, whether it's sexism or homophobia or racism, you know, we are the older women, and we have to own that, and nobody else cares. I mean, we have to be the ones who change things, and we have to like ourselves better, I think, than we do, instead of always trying to be sort of 10 years younger, you know, 10 pounds thinner. You know, I think sometimes we dig ourselves a hole, and I'm certainly not entirely out of it myself, and maybe never will be. But, you know, we're the ones who have to sort of stop saying things, even if we think them. Young people these days, ...
Yeah,
In my day,
absolutely. ...
When we, ... It's like, you know, it's just try and be curious, stay interested, stay engaged, and try not to sort of lapse into those tropes.
Yeah,
Might help.
absolutely. But also, importantly, is I don't think we should buy into ageist comments amongst ourselves. You know, she looks good for her age.
Exactly.
You know, that's the thing. I think we need to be on the watch for that. And yeah, and
No, absolutely. I mean, I said it earlier about my own mother, and as the words were sort of coming out of my mouth, I was like, you know, this is wrong. But I mean, like all culture and progress in sort of getting over discrimination, the language we use, it starts there. I mean, it's really important. I mean, I just don't like it when people sort of talk about political correctness. Changing our language is the beginning of changing our minds and changing our hearts, and it's important. So, yeah, I don't always take my own advice, but I'll keep trying. Yep.
And I mean, if I can ask you quite a vague question, because it's something that sometimes comes to mind. You know, you and I, you know, we still work, and but once you've stepped off a train of busyness that many women go through, and that is parenting, and then maybe caring for older parents, and that sort of thing, and you step forward, and then you kind of think, well, what are we for? What are we for?
Sorry, does anyone else want to take that question? I mean, I think in a way I did go through the what am I for stage. I mean, I think in a way the subtext of this, the selfish subtext of this is exactly that question. But I still, 10 years later, don't really have a kind of snappy answer. All I know is that I'm a happier person, and I'm busy, and I can't do a checklist, but I'm occupied and engaged with the world, with my family, with my grandchildren, with my friends, with my work. Maybe I don't need, you know, to sort of think one day I'll have world domination anymore. Maybe that's the thing, is sort of accepting the losses sort of, no, I'm no longer going to be offered the juicy roles. I'm no longer going to be center stage. A 20-year-old doesn't really care what I think, and why should they? I need to reposition myself, and perhaps it's a little bit, I think, what happened to a lot of people during this pandemic, of sort of on a hierarchy of needs, sort of simplifying your life, being content and happy with less materially, travel-wise, like sort of, where am I going next? What's going on? I have to constantly be doing something, incredibly busy and important. I don't feel those things anymore. Which is not to say I'm going to subside into an armchair in the corner and shut up, because I'm not.
No. I also think that we have, and again, we're extremely fortunate that we have time on our hands now. And that is time to really consider, and time to study, and time, if it's not studying, I mean, it's time to go down rabbit holes of odd things, that might interest you. If you have time to sign up to masterclass and sit with Anna Wintour for 10 sessions while she talks about how she edited Vogue, or Amy Tan talking about how she wrote her memoir, etc. And I think that is a great luxury we have, is the time to have, to go down those rabbit holes. I mean, this is what I'm reading at the moment, because people keep thinking I'm reading things about, government and corruption. I'm not. This is the Alice B. Toklas cookbook. Now, Alice B. Toklas, she was Gertrude Stein's life partner, and she was known for her hats and for her luxurious moustache. And the two of them, I mean, this is 1930s Paris, and the two of them used to motor around France, and she would gather recipes wherever she went. And I'm finding it completely fascinating, because it's also about Picasso, and it's about the circle they had in Paris in between the wars, etc. So I mean, we've got the time now to follow strange interests, or not strange, but unusual things.
Absolutely. I think that's true. I need to find some more strange and unusual things. That's very inspiring, Michele. Have you cooked any of the recipes? Have you made any of them?
Well, no, I haven't. No, quite. A pink pompadour bass. I haven't tried the pink pompadour bass.
It sounds like a hat. Yeah.
No, yes, yeah. No,
sounds more like millinery. Yeah.
Completely charming. It really is. Shall we ask Jen about some questions? Let's
Hello.
Come back in there, Jen.
Hello.
Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Cool. We have a couple of questions from someone that I think you may recognize. Belinda asks, what was the most useful thing you learned about yourself while writing the book? And I think, that's Belinda Bauer, so I'm sure you know who that is.
Yeah, is that you turned out to be a hell of a lot less annoying than you were when you were little. I mean, what a question to ask me in front of all these people.
Here's another one. Do you have a role model?
In a way, I don't know about that term. A role model, I mean, if you mean, are there people, women in particular, who I admire and aspire to be like in whatever way, there are many. And I know most of them personally. But a role model always seems to me a slightly misleading word, like hero. It's very overused. So no, I don't base my aspirations on anyone particularly famous.
But you do aspire to Michelle Obama's upper arms. You have said that.
I did say, actually, that like Botox, nobody needs upper arms like Michelle Obama, but, who doesn't want them? It's like 17 pairs of sandals, Botox and upper arms like Michelle Obama. It's like, no, nobody needs them. But sure, why not? Why not desire them?
Yeah, very much a nice to have. Other questions, Jen?
We have a comment, as you can see from throughout the talk, we've had numerous people saying they either love the book or they can't wait to get their hands on the book. So that's been really nice to see. You don't usually have such an engaged audience. So yeah, that's been really great. Karen says, or Karen, depending on where in the world she's from, says, loved your book, Charlotte. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And then we have Belinda saying, I was hoping I would be your role model for growing old gracefully. Winky smiley.
Belinda, you're definitely up there on my list of admirable women. Yeah, you are.
Philippa says, everything you say is so relatable, Charlotte. I can't wait to read it. And actually, we have quite a few questions that are like streaming in now. Here's one from Robin who says, what is the best advice you could give to late 30-year-old women about to go through menopause?
Don't even think about it, Robin, until it happens. I mean, why look for trouble, huh? Late 30s. Just, you're fabulous. It'll be fine until it isn't. So there's no point sort of what do you call it, Michelle? Anticipating disaster. It'll find you, no problem.
That's very comforting, thank you. Then we have one here from Lauren who says, it's quite a deep one, I think. Do men need to get over being young, or is this for women only?
Oh, that's such a great question, Lauren. I think, we'd have to ask them. I mean, there's such wonderful men in my life, men I've worked with, men in my family, friends, and I almost sort of deliberately avoided bringing them into it, apart from husband and that kind of, very close character, because I didn't feel it was my place to delve into their story. Cultural appropriation might be too strong a word to use, but this was, my story and my girls. Clearly men go through something not entirely dissimilar, however it manifests. But I'd be very interested to know how guys respond to that question. But it's not my book.
Good answer, I think. And then finally, we have a comment rather than a question, but I think it's a good one to end on as we sort of wind down the launch. Thanks for coming. Please leave by 9. #FuckItList. And I think we're on track to be able to fit in another glass of wine before bed if we start winding down.
Just going to totter off with a glass of wine in my pajamas. Thank you. And can I just quickly say thank you so much to Michelle, to Jennifer, and to Lovely Love Books, who are just so fabulous and supportive of so many books. And I'm really sorry it couldn't be in your store, Kate. But yeah, let's support them back. Thank you.
So let me just mention again for those who might have joined late that signed copies of the book are available at Love Books in Melville in Johannesburg. So if you're going to buy one and you haven't got one yet, that's probably the best place to go if you would like a signed copy, which increases its value by a significant amount. But it's also available. It's available online and in good bookstores in South Africa and in the UK and in a number of other countries, I believe, as well. So wherever you are in the world, you'll be able to get yourself a copy probably. Michelle, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I want to say well done, Charlotte. Thank God. I mean, this was a long gestation. So cheers, and here's to the next one, I hope.
Cheers. Thank you all so much. Cheers, Michelle.
Thank you very, very much to Michelle and Charlotte for this wonderful, witty and wise conversation. I've actually started getting into gardening over the last few years, And now I'm thinking I should be giving that up as soon as possible for something more strange and unusual.
Genealogy,
But
God.
seriously, but in seriousness, it's great to have access to this kind of irreverent and honest study of womanhood. And I think we need more of these kinds of books. So thank you very much for writing this one. And yeah, as I say, if you haven't got a copy yet, signed copies at Love Books. Thank you very much to Love Books and Penguin Random House for helping us put this launch together.
Absolutely.
If you've been watching live, if you feel like you have a friend or someone you know who may have enjoyed this conversation, feel free to share it with them by just clicking share on wherever you're watching, either on Facebook or on YouTube. You can just click that share button, and the conversation will be available for them to watch even after it's live. So it'll still be up in perpetuity. And let me just share a couple of the final comments. Peach says, almost finished your book with lots of tears and laughter. I'm loving it. Oh, and she's actually added a question on there, which we don't, well, I suppose we have a couple of minutes if you want to answer what your mum and auntie's take on the book is.
Completely, they didn't bat an eyelid. I was quite worried. I was like, look, I have thrown you under a couple of buses for comic effect here. Oh, no, darling, what do we care? We're so old. As long as there's no paparazzi on the doorstep, we don't mind. Very lucky.
That's great. Kerry says, congratulations, Charlotte. Can't wait to read it. And John says, so proud of you, living life to the fullest. So we've got quite a few more comments coming in. So if you want to go and have a look, Charlotte, on Facebook and YouTube, you'll be able to see how people have been enjoying the conversation, which is really cool. Thank you, everyone.
Nice.
And thank you for joining us. And thank you for your comments. And have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you all. Thank you, Penguin and Nelway. Bye.
Bye.
How do we leave?